All right, folks. Let's talk about Andrew Yang. So Andrew Yang, I and this show was extremely critical of in the beginning. And one of the things that I'm honestly self-assessing, and people, be comfortable with contradictions, because we're all contradictions and we're all imperfect and we're all learning and we're all refining. So even as I will go on a tear absolutely correctly against Elizabeth Warren as an example, I'm questioning. I think the critiques of Tulsi as an example, particularly with regards to India, 100% on point. I think, to be honest, of all the three people that people kept telling me were in it in a way that was going to at least help Bernie or not be adversarial to him, Tulsi Gabbard is the only one that ever actually had Bernie's back. So I'm going to have to give a big credit where credit's due there. And then also the broader question of what is the relationship between people who support a candidate and what is a candidate speaking to versus them and their own program. And I realized later on, I think that, Andrew Yang is actually speaking to some very important things for certain groups of young people. And I regret that we didn't do it in such a way that could communicate with some of the people that might be communicatable to. I think a lot of his gang is, it's just kind of stands and whatever for anybody else. Yeah, I mean, they're just goofy and, they're going to always complain and whine about everything and never accept any, actual criticism. But, fair enough. So I wish, and I still hope that people who were intrigued by Andrew Yang, that I and we had spent more time critiquing him, but situating why he would be appealing, and then really clearly explaining why, that if you had any type of, at least, obviously progressive commitment, you need to stop fucking around with Yang and focus on Sanders. And I make no apology for that, because these are real things and real choices. Andrew Yang has gone and worked in CNN, which again, I don't begrudge him. That's fine. Most of his commentary on CNN have been, from what I've seen, have frankly just been absolutely exceedingly conventional CNN stuff. People are worried in swing districts about Sanders, very, Bernie's angry, Biden's empathetic, it's very empathetic to make people unable to discharge their medical bills through bankruptcy. So, nothing about Andrew Yang. I thought Andrew Yang might endorse Bloomberg for a minute. I think there's nothing about him as an individual. And again, as polemical as I am, even with Warren, it's not that I think Andrew Yang is just a guy who's getting ahead, and that's whatever. That's most people. That's all of us to one degree or another. But when you start mixing that with somebody that people are talking about as some great humanitarian hero, when their actual policy packages, they oppose Medicare for all. Depending on the platform, it's not clear, but on some platforms, they very strongly indicate that their goal with this $1,000 a month is to phase out significant parts of the broader social safety net, overtly opposes increasing the minimum wage, and everything they've said on foreign policy, from Julian Assange to Israel-Palestine, is appalling. And you can't deal with that critique because, you think he's a nice person or something, or all you can see is the idea of $1,000 a month, which is great. Sure, if it's on top of other things, that's a problem. And now Andrew Yang has endorsed Joe Biden. Let's play that real quick. Are we all right with it?
I believe that Joe Biden will be the Democratic nominee, and I've always said I'm going to support whoever the nominee is. So I hereby am endorsing Joe Biden to be not just the nominee for the Democratic Party, but the next president of the United States. And I say this, having supported Bernie Sanders in 2016, Bernie was an inspiration for me, inspired my run. But the math says Joe is our prohibitive nominee. We need to bring the party together. We need to start working on defeating Donald Trump.
So let's be very clear. I think there was one element that Yang was inspired by Bernie about, which is the idea that there's a huge amount of seriously disaffected young people and working people who are on the losing end of our current arrangement, and that in a way material answers to material questions. Now, it was absolutely antithetical to Bernie because it was not about power. It was not about a comprehensive answer to those solutions. It's like that meme where one guy, a bubble above his head says emerging class consciousness. And then some guy comes along and kind of looks like Kenny Powers and says, how about you take $1,000 to fuck off? And that, again, intentionally or not, I already know how many, folks will get triggered, but please try to actually listen a little bit. That the answer was none of the big questions can be dealt with. We can't reform technology and subordinate it to democratic will, as an example. Capitalism is just going to happen, and maybe we can give you $1,000, but we can't even give you healthcare, clearly, as an example. And again, the idea that people took the spin that Medicare for all just meant a positive intention towards people having healthcare was, it's just embarrassing, but it's also disturbing. I mean, let me put on my IDW hat here. Things mean things. Medicare for all has a meaning. And even if you want to get into Australia does it differently and it's more similar, or
it's a disaster.
Yeah, first of all, Australia is not remotely as successful as comprehensive systems like the UK. But even there, even the closest analogs you could have to the United States, which are, by the way, the worst performers on these global systems, you're already getting into a realm of government involvement of which none of these people, and certainly not Yang, from anything I read or heard, was seriously proposing. And the last point I'll make is not only shouldn't you be surprised about him endorsing Biden, and he wasn't helpful of Bernie during the campaign, obviously, but I think this is what you will see. You already are seeing on MSNBC and assorted outlets, after demonizing, after calling people who are fighting for basic dignity brown shirts, after doing everything we can to defame, lie about Bernie Sanders, to smear and lie and defame his supporters, after saying that any type of answer to any systemic problems of poverty, inequality, and ecology in this country are never going to happen, and hope and everything is dead. Now we're freaked out about youth turnout. Now we're freaked out. Now all of a sudden we realize, hey, we can constantly disrespect these people. We've dedicated our professional lives to harming them, and in many respects, literally, as lobbyists. But whoa, Joe's looking super old, and Hillary didn't figure it out. And what the hell are we going to do now? The SOP. I will not be surprised if when Joe Biden starts to kind of wheel out the, I'm actually here and cognizant tour, I think he might propose a test version of UBI. And I think that the politics, that what the elite see in Andrew Yang is the settlement that they will want to make with a post-industrial future. It's not labor unions. It's not power. It's certainly not systemic answers to wealth concentration and obscene inequality, and it's certainly not actual systems accountability for the powerful. It is, how can we sop you enough and satiate you enough that you can consume on a basic level and be okay? And like all these other things we always say, yeah, that's nicer than we'll throw you to the wolves. But it is not power, it's not dignity, and it is not a fundamental answer to any of the contradictions we're dealing with. And I'll just say, and then open it up. I've seen the one thing that I could take that actually would bother me when people would say that we were privileged for saying this. And I could tell you that I've lived most of my life in either objective real poverty or serious lower middle class living. And I completely understand the urgency of needing cash. But I also see that if you start to strip the whole infrastructure around that cash, it means less and less and less. If you don't have rent control, it means less and less. If you don't have health care, it means less and less. And if you are turning over the keys to our future to a handful of tech monopolies that you say cannot have a wealth tax, that can't be meaningfully regulated, and in exchange is a relatively small amount of money, which will already disproportionately help folks in areas with a lower cost of living, that is not the way of a dignified future. And I hope people can let go of whatever emotional attachments they have about Andrew Yang or even interest in UBI. let's not demonize UBI. You're interested in UBI as part of the whole kind of package. Great, cool, whatever. I honestly don't care. But don't fall for this game.
Oh, I just wanted to also hit on something about Andrew Yang's past too that I think gives you a lot of a stronger explanation for why we've been so hesitant about his ideas for UBI. You know, what Yang did before he ran for president is he ran a nonprofit called Venture for America. And that idea was very technocratic, top down. It's a pretty old thesis that the problem with struggling cities across the United States is that they just don't have enough smart young kids staying around to build businesses there, right? So his idea was that he would go to the top schools in the country and he would offer well-performing students a fellowship where they would give them funding to start, to make their tech startup in New Orleans or Baltimore instead of going to San Francisco, New York, or LA, right? And it was a massive success with investors and billionaires. He spoke to Obama. He gave TED Talks.
Yep.
He promised that he was going to make 100,000 jobs. Didn't come anywhere near that.
Sounds like his presidential campaign.
Oh, seriously. I mean, it's like, they promised to make 100. I know it was less than 4,000 jobs that was created through this fellowship, and they had hundreds of fellows. And the ones who succeeded and they had a startup that was successful, got off the ground, today, the majority of those startups are in Los Angeles, New York, or San Francisco, and we have not seen any revitalization.
In the Midwest.
And, I'm not trying to blame Andrew Yang for trying something and having it fail. What I am trying to articulate and point out is that Andrew Yang is a very enthusiastic person who I think genuinely, on a certain level, does want to do something. He sees problems that he wants to do something about it. But he is very comfortable, for example, cozying up to billionaires in Las Vegas, right, to get investment money, to help out people at the top, well-performing students, to try to enact changes top-down rather than bottom-up, right? This is somebody whose worldview is flipped from ours, where we're trying to empower people. We don't want, so for example, like UBI, his UBI is basically set up to stop people from starving, right? But it is predicated on the idea that there will always be people living in poverty. Our vision of the world is that we don't want to have a society where people are living in poverty. And that's the fundamental difference from a kind of Yang perspective and from what we're doing. And you could see it in the projects that he's worked on in the past too, why that kind of short-sightedness when it comes to empowerment is not a model that actually is able to implement the kind of changes that he wants to see.
Absolutely. You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.